Okay, good morning, everybody. Did you all hear me? I said good morning. So, welcome to the 18th Annual Outstanding Citizens Award Ceremony. It's pretty impressive, 18 years. Before we start, I'd ask us all to stand and do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Before we start, I'd like to just acknowledge some folks that have come to help support us on this very special occasion. Vice Mayor Rick Jennings from the City of Sacramento, thank you for being here. Fire Chief Walt White, City Attorney for Sacramento Jim Sanchez, Chief Brian Louie from Sacramento Police Department, Chief Deputy Phil Brelge from the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department, Commander Gina Anderson from the Citrus Heights Police Department, Assistant Chief Steve Dowling from the California Highway Patrol, Chief Brian Noblet from the Elk Grove Police Department, Chief Cindy Renault from Folsom Police Department, representatives from Assembly Ken Cooley's office. I saw Joe Kress here in the room. He's the president of the Sacramento County Attorneys Association. If I've missed anybody, please don't be offended. I will say that I also would like to recognize anybody in this room that has been a past recipient of this award. And I specifically recognize Mr. Kennedy over here, who's a dear friend. For those of you that have been past recipients, thank you for coming to this important event. So before we start off, I want to just talk for a few seconds about why we're here and why this matters, not only to everybody in this room, and it should matter to everybody here in Sacramento. For those of you that don't know, this week marks National Crime Victims' Rights Week. In communities across our country, every day this week, communities have recognized victims and witnesses for overcoming fear, sometimes shame, and really an indifference sometimes, so that they can gain a voice for themselves, a voice for others, and ultimately so that we can all achieve justice across our communities. Behind us on the screens up here are the quilts that are displayed in our office. They should and always will be a reminder to each of us that work this profession every day that there are lives taken by violence in our community. They are painful to their family members, painful to our community, and they should always serve as a reminder to the why we do our daily work. This year's theme for Crime Victims' Rights Week is really three simple but complex words: strength, resilience, and justice. Every day on the streets of Sacramento, there are countless members of our community who are either victims of or witnesses to crime. And anybody that, as I say, works in the trenches every day knows that those crimes often involve, quite frankly, unspeakable acts. And it's those victims that must have the strength and the resilience to achieve that justice. And that strength is often marked by a phone call to police or the sheriff or to law enforcement. It's strength that's marked by reporting facts that are often so personal or so graphic or so horrific that it's really a wonder that they report at all. But they do. And those victims may be a spouse or a partner who has suffered years of abuse by the very person that they thought they loved the most or they trusted the most. Or that victim may be a child who reports about his or her father or mother or loved one who thought they could trust them the most and who was there to protect them. Or perhaps that victim is an elderly person who's been taken advantage of simply because he or she is particularly vulnerable. Or perhaps, in sometimes those rare occasions, that victim was simply home alone in her house, asleep in her bed, when, as I say, the boogeyman came in and did unspeakable acts. And those witnesses may be perhaps the loved one of that victim, or perhaps even the parent or the sibling of that offender or that abuser. Or perhaps that witness is a complete stranger who just happened upon one of these very crimes and simply acted out of the goodness of humanity to help that person. And so every day we move from the streets of Sacramento to the walls within the courthouse. And those very victims and those very witnesses must have the strength and the resilience to overcome challenges that I'm very confident that many of us would falter if we were asked to do the same. And every day in the courtrooms throughout this country and throughout this county, those very victims and those witnesses, they show up for one simple reason, and that is that third word, which is justice. I've said this before, but it's very true. In our business, every so often, in the walls and the halls of the district attorney's office, you will hear a phrase that is uttered, sometimes in the DA's office, sometimes in the courthouse. It's a phrase that often, as I would say, does describe that moment of strength, resilience, and justice when that has emerged on that particular day. And that is a very simple phrase, which is, today was a good day for the people. So today, I have no doubt that you all will witness strength, resilience, and justice. And at the end of today, you will realize that there are, in fact, superheroes among us today and every day in the streets of Sacramento. And on this day, at our 18th annual Outstanding Citizens Award, you will realize that today is a good day for the people. Today's recipients were nominated by deputy DAs, victim advocates, investigators, and they were nominated because they felt that these individuals showed great courage, showed extraordinary personal sacrifices, and they showed tremendous perseverance to overcome really extraordinarily difficult personal circumstances in order to testify and participate in a criminal justice system that can oftentimes be very daunting and scary. They've aided and assisted our members of law enforcement to hold individuals accountable, to not only protect themselves, but to protect others, and to prevent further victimization. Not only have these individuals provided great service through their participation in the criminal justice system, but I have no doubt by hearing their stories today, you will be inspired, and others will be inspired to do the same. Before we start with the Outstanding Citizens Award, we first start with our Outstanding Service Commendation Award, where we honor an individual citizen who contributes to public safety through his service as a volunteer advocate. And with that, I will ask that Deputy DA Heidi Brennan come up to present that award.
So I present John Myers to you, District Attorney Anne Marie Schubert, and everybody else in the room. So many years ago, I went to law school. And while I was in law school, I took a class called juvenile law. Juvenile law was primarily about child abuse, and I found it fascinating and I learned a lot. The professor of my class was John Myers, and I learned about different types of abuse and pattern burns, and a lot of information that came in very handy when I became a deputy district attorney and was assigned to the child abuse unit. So let's just say 20-some years pass. I haven't seen John Myers since I was a student in his class, and I become the deputy district attorney in the child abduction unit. While I'm there over the past year, I have worked on multiple cases with John Myers. He is not only a professor, he's also a family law attorney in Sacramento County, and he is receiving the first Commendation Award from our office because he is the first attorney I've met in my entire career who truly works for free. He has done these cases pro bono. I get paid to do it. He gets nothing but personal satisfaction for helping these children in need. And the difference is in a Hague case, which is international child abduction, as a deputy district attorney, I don't get to seek justice. I don't get to treat anybody like victims or represent anybody. I have to be a neutral party. That's really hard for me because a part of my job that I love has always been advocating for victims, seeking justice, and fighting for the rights of people. So when I have to be neutral, it's extremely hard. John Myers has made this much easier by getting involved in my cases and taking on the best interest of the children. Because in Hague cases, it's where a parent from another country takes their children out of that country, hiding them from the left behind parent. So we deal with both incoming and outgoing, but when children are brought to our county from a different country, and John and I have personally worked on ones from Mexico, Latvia, Japan, and they come here and there's this battle over where these kids are supposed to be. The law flat out says it's not about the best interest of the children. You're supposed to look at where they're a resident of and all these different factors and go to court, family law court, which is new for me, and figure out if they go back there to argue it or stay here. So when John Myers volunteers his time, not because they're friends or family friends or somebody he knows, but complete strangers, he does it to protect these children and advocate for them, whether they should stay in this country or they should be returned to the country, whether they've been abused. He gets them free mental evaluations on the same day we have court. He does amazing work. He files legal documents, and he has represented both the children or different parents, because when he looks at a case, he decides what's in the best interest, and that's who he chooses to represent. So I won't go through the different cases we've had, but one of the more interesting ones we had lately was a child who was born in the United States. His mother was from Mexico. His father was from Japan. So the child was a citizen of 3 different countries and had a heart defect. He had a hole in his heart. He was 1 year old, and so the parents looked at medical treatment in the United States, and then they went and looked at medical treatment in Japan. So while they're in Japan, there's some battles going on between the parents. For instance, the mother is still nursing, and the family's really hard on her about it, and dad reports her to law enforcement for nursing the baby. There's different issues going on. So one day, the dad says he's going to go to the market with the child, and he doesn't return. He abducts his own child, leaving the mother in Japan, and she's originally from Mexico. And so she's beside herself with grief and does whatever she can to try to locate her child, and that results in ultimately filing a Hague petition, which is where we come in. When the children are located here, it becomes our job to file the petition, even though we don't represent the party, and try to help facilitate getting this before a court to get the child where the child should be. So this wasn't actually our case. This was Fresno's case, and they were working on it. And one day I get a call from Fresno law enforcement, and they say, hey, we have this case going on, but we just learned the child and the father and the grandparents will be at the Sacramento airport in 2 days. So we're going to give it to you. You'll have to refile and redo all the paperwork, and it's massive amounts of international paperwork that you have to file. And so in the meantime, I'm trying to be the lawyer, and I have an amazing investigative team. That doesn't mean any of you should be putting in for my position ever, but I have Lieutenant Gracia, who within those 2 days put together an entire, basically like a little task force team working with the Sacramento Sheriff's Department at the airport, and Bruce Anderson, who helped, and Rito Saavedra, who is a team player big time on our team and does a lot of work for us, and Monica, I'm going to butcher this, Kajowski, who is not on our team but should be because she helps us a lot as well. So these 4 amazing people put together this little task force to basically recover and return this child, and working with the Sheriff's Department. So meanwhile, I'm filing legal papers like crazy, and this is where John Myers comes into play. He gets involved, and he basically works with mom. So he kind of takes the role almost of a victim advocate in the way. He holds her hand through the process. He helps get me any information I need from her. He actually meets with her and transports her the day that we're going to try to recover this child. And so we send a team to the airport, and it has to be, every detail has to be in place. And Lieutenant Gracia did a fantastic job on making sure that was all set. Because you don't want any panic, you don't want any violence, you want to traumatize the child as little as possible, because that's emotional to be yanked from your parent, go with strangers at an airport. So John Myers brings mother and meets at my office. My amazing team recovers the child from the airport, which, by the way, in these cases, you have to immediately give dad due process, so you have to have a court hearing set up at family court, so he can come if he chooses to and fight the battle in family court that same day, that afternoon. Well, he chose to get back on the plane to Japan with his parents, called the Japanese consul, who's calling me. That probably freaked me out more than anything in my career, but we got through it. Anyhow, so I show up I'm at my office, my team shows up with a child, and John Myers and Dulce is the mother, I don't know if I pronounced that right either, but she's with him, and she's pretty much an emotional mess. She has not seen her child in 10 months. By now, the child is 2. So that means that's almost half of this child's life that she did not get to be with him. So he was gone for 10 months total, and I was a little bit worried. Is he even gonna recognize his mom? That's pretty young. Half his life he hasn't seen her. So we're in my office, and the child had really bonded with Lieutenant Gracia, who also had to arrange transportation and car seat and all that within this time. And so, but at this point, the child finally came to me, and I took the child, and I was gonna give, his name's Daniel, let's give him a name. So Daniel goes to see his mom, and he did what I was fearing. He panicked. He looks, he's about to be handed to another stranger today. This is like his 3rd stranger he's gonna be handed to. And he buries his head and turns, and we move away, and I kind of comfort him, and I bring him back, and I just stand there and let him look, and he kind of stares. And I don't know if recognition kicked in or what, but I got complete goosebumps. And although we're taught to be completely professional, you couldn't help but having tears in your eyes as he reached out for his mom that day. And she was sobbing, and he was being held, and it was just one of those moments that I'll never forget. And it happens because John Myers helps me with these cases. He's been a huge asset to our office, and I'm still always in shock that he does it completely free when he is working as a professor, a family law attorney, and has a huge full schedule. But if you were to read about him, you'd read he also writes books and articles, and his primary focus is always about abused children or domestic violence. So he is very deserving of this award, and I would like everybody to give him a big hand.
I just want to take 30 seconds to thank the district attorney and Heidi for this enormous honor, which is the biggest honor of my life, by far, I assure you. And I want to give a shout out to the district attorney's child abduction unit. You have a wonderful child abduction unit. It's kind of one of the unsung departments in the district attorney's office. But every day, Heidi Brennan, the deputy DA in that office, Lieutenant Gracia, Mr. Anderson, and others in that office go out into the community. They rescue kids every day. In many different ways. We really owe them the debt of gratitude. It's just my privilege and honor to be able to be of some small assistance to them. Thank you very much.
Next up, I'd like to invite up Deputy District Attorney Jeff Harry to present our first Outstanding Citizen Award.
Good morning. Can everybody hear me? Yes. Awesome. Okay. I want to thank you, Anne Marie, first for assigning me this case in 2013. I also need to thank the investigations team that assisted me on this case throughout. Carol Mims was the lead detective from the Sheriff's Department. I also had Terry Castiglia help me out on this case. Jim Lassen helped me out on this case. Joyce Thorgrimson helped me out on this case. I'm sure I'm forgetting some others, but I appreciate it very much. And thank you, Colette Brown, just for being the best and always being who you are. Now I'd like to introduce you all to a couple of warriors I've come to know over the last 3 years. This is Michelle, and this is her older sister, Colleen. I call them warriors because they have endured, they have withstood, they have outlasted, and they have survived an absolute nightmare. I try not to be all that dramatic in the way I do my job because sometimes I think things get blown out of proportion, but forgive me because this case deserves any drama I may bring upon it. These two endured a childhood of instability, terror, and abuse. Their parents divorced when they were very young. Then around the ages of 5 and 6, their mother introduced them to her second husband, their stepfather, who would become their monster. Shortly after that, they began living in the same home with the defendant, their stepfather. These two, when they were little girls, didn't get to sleep through the night, dreaming about unicorns, water balloon fights, things of that nature. Those dreams were interrupted by the nightmare that was their stepfather, the defendant, when he crept into their room repeatedly in the middle of the night. They endured those nights. Later on, as they became a little older, at the ages of 7 and 9, they endured the humiliation and embarrassment that came with reporting the nightmare to a counselor at school, and then male officers and male social workers. They endured clinical examinations in cold, sterile environments that most females don't experience until they're much older. They endured living in foster care, away from their mother, their brothers, their sisters. They endured their own mother's betrayal when, after they reported what their stepfather did to them, she urged them to lie about it and say it did not happen. They loved their mom. They trusted her. She said, if you say it didn't happen, you'll never see him again. So they took it back. And she betrayed them by inviting him back into the house. And about a year later, the abuse continued. They endured his repeated violations throughout their preteen and teen years. Then in 2012, they found the courage, as young adults in their 20s, to come forward and talk to sheriff's deputies, again, males. They had to endure the embarrassment and humiliation that goes along with that. They then endured the 3-year legal battle that ensued. They endured a roller coaster ride of emotions, anticipating the next week's trial testimony, only to have the case continued over my objection. And then during trial, they withstood the defendant's arrogant, cruel stare. They withstood the antagonizing cross-examination of the defense attorney. And then a wonderful thing happened on October 17th of 2016. Michelle and Colleen finally outlasted the defendant when the jury convicted him for all the despicable things he had done. These two warriors have survived the defendant's abuse. They've survived emotional and physical trauma. They've survived despite a lack of support from their mother and other family members. Now there's only 2 things left for you guys to do: recover and live your lives. Thank you for being here to honor these 2 warriors. They're intelligent, they're patient, they're resilient, and lovable. Anne Marie, I present to you Michelle and Colleen Cotter for this year's Outstanding Citizen of the Year. What's that? Sure.
So I just wanted to say something really quickly. I wrote it down. So I was told that no one would believe me, especially not law enforcement. I want to thank first Carol Mims for being the first adult to fully hear and believe me. You were the first to show me that what was done to me deserves justice. I want to thank my victim's advocate, Colette Brown, for standing with me through the darkest of times. I never felt alone with you. District Attorney, of course, Jeff Harry, Thank you. If it weren't for you, your passion and persistence, we would not be celebrating this victory today. Your ferocity in the face of evil gave me hope and strength where I had none. I also want to thank Judge Michael Sweet and the jury for listening to the truth and dispensing justice. I'm grateful for my incredible support system and my therapist for teaching me that vulnerability is strength. Finally, and most importantly, I want to thank my sister. She is my rock, and if it wasn't for her and speaking honestly, I don't think I would be alive today. So thank you.
I don't even need to say anything after that, right? Definitely spoke for both of us. I have the same exact sentiments. Yeah, wow. Never thought I would be in this position, ever. I feel the same way she does. Thank you so much for everything you guys do. And Jeff, Colette, Carol, you guys know how I feel about you. And yeah, thank you. Thank you, everybody.
I'd now like to invite up Deputy DA Bruce Chang.
Morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm here to speak to you about an outstanding citizen who unfortunately could not be with us today because she's recovering from a recent surgery that's unrelated, thankfully, to what happened to her. But her family and she expressed their deepest thanks and appreciation for this recognition and this honor. District Attorney Schubert talked about the strength and resilience that our victims show by coming forward and talking about these things that have happened to them. And to that, I'd like to add one word, and that's courage. Strength, resilience, and courage are shown not by the times that life knocks you down or challenges you, but the times that you get back up and how you react to those challenges and those awful things that you run into in the course of your life. And I'd like to talk about the early morning hours of October 3rd of 2015. 72-year-old Karen Van Skyke was out for a walk, walking her dog like she did every morning in the northern parts of Sacramento County. Little did she know that defendant Joseph McKeever was out prowling those very same streets, driving from house to house. He had a condom in his pocket, and he had blue latex gloves in his pocket, and nothing was going to stop him on that morning from getting what he wanted. Karen was walking her dog, as she did every morning, and she came back to her house at about 6 or 6:15. Seemed like an ordinary early autumn morning to let some fresh air into the house, as she always did. She closed her screen door, but left the sliding glass door open. You know, I think if nothing else, people want to feel safe and secure and comfortable in their own homes. She sat down to watch TV, as she did every morning, but then she noticed that her dog was barking at that screen door that she had left the sliding glass door open. She walked over to the screen door, and that's where she met the defendant. The defendant had gloved up, had climbed over her fence, and was waiting on the other side of that screen door for her. As soon as he saw her, he rushed through the screen door with enough force to knock it off its track. And he punched her with enough force to knock the eyeglasses off of the 72-year-old grandmother. He struck her again, and her hearing aids fell out of her ears. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was when she first showed courage. This woman, who was the widow of a Sacramento Sheriff's Department deputy, wasn't going to give up without a fight. In fact, her first reaction, even though she couldn't see and she couldn't hear, was to go for her late husband's taser and try to defend the house and try to defend herself. Of course, the defendant, being over 50 years younger than she was, disarmed her easily, struck her again, and knocked her to the floor. He got on top of her, and Karen continued to show strength, resilience, and courage in that she refused to go down without a fight. She reached and clawed at the defendant's eyes. In fact, she left visible scratch marks that even days later helped in the identification of the defendant when he was contacted by the Sacramento Sheriff's Department. She continued to reach for her taser. She saw it out of the corner of her eye and tried to reach for it to defend herself. The defendant saw that as well and started to choke her. And he used enough force that he left finger marks on her neck as she lay there on the floor of her living room. And even as she became afraid, terrified that the end was near, she still showed courage in talking to the defendant, trying to reason with him, and telling him that you don't need to do this, you don't want to do this. I'm old enough to be your grandmother. And somehow, in the midst of this horrible assault, which we really don't need to go into the details of, those words resonated with the defendant. And even as he talked to Detective Kelly Clark, he remembered those words, and he said that that's why he stopped his assault when he did. Now, of course, the defendant wasn't done in Karen's house. He demanded that she get up off the floor of her living room, and she take him into the bedroom and give him her jewelry. And Karen showed resilience. She showed the courage to actually reach into her closet and pull out, as she described, the cheap stuff. So she showed the defendant the cheap stuff, which was hanging up, and protected her jewelry that really mattered to her. And the defendant decided he didn't want that, so he took some money from her purse and he left. But of course, he warned her, I'm watching you, so don't call 911. And here again, Karen showed the resilience when life knocks you down of how you get back up. She waited a couple of minutes. She found a spare pair of glasses to replace the ones that the defendant had smashed. And she put on her hearing aids again, was able to call law enforcement. She was calm enough as the sheriff's department arrived at her house to do a walkthrough, kind of show where different things had happened and where the sliding glass door had been moved, where the fence that she came in was. And in fact, she sat down and helped the Sacramento Sheriff's Department composite sketch artist create a composite sketch of the defendant that was so accurate. The defendant's mother saw that sketch on TV and recognized her own son. Now, her courage continued after her arrest. Her resilience continued after her arrest. She tried to keep living her life as she had for years in Sacramento County, but found she couldn't sleep. She couldn't sleep in that house, in her own house. So she wound up moving out of county with her son and her daughter-in-law. But she never wavered, even when told that she would have to come back and testify. She had anxiety, and she was kind enough to welcome investigator Terry Castiglia, Dana, myself, Kelly Clark, to her house on multiple occasions to prepare for trial. And even though she was so worried and anxious and nervous before the trial actually started, that she started having panic attacks at the thought of facing Joseph McKeever again, she was willing to go to her doctor and talk about what happened and get some anti-anxiety medications so that she'd be able to get through the trial. And at the end of it all, she got in front of a jury. She faced the defendant. She talked about the events of October 3rd of 2015 with the strength and the resilience and the courage that we hope for. And as a result of it all, the defendant is doing 14 years to life. Karen, as I mentioned, can't be here today, but District Attorney Schubert, I'd like to present Karen Van Skyke to you and accepting on behalf of her, Terry Castiglia, Dana Burns, Kelly Clark. Just to add kind of a final note, Kelly Clark was an amazing detective on this, and she showed great empathy in talking to Karen and also talking to the defendant, and to the point where the defendant basically admitted to Kelly most of what he had done. Kelly continues to keep in touch with Karen to this day. And Karen is back walking her dog in the early morning hours outside of her new home. So, Ms. Schubert, I'd like to present Karen Van Skyke.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I just want to say that I'm a pretty cheap imitation for Karen, but I know that her heart is here. It's hard for her also to be in front of crowds. She's just shy as well. So she's tons of fun, and she's an amazing woman, and her family loves her so much. And Fran, her daughter-in-law, is the person that I worked with a ton because this case began in juvenile court and took a long time to get to adult court. And Fran did not miss one court date. So I thank the whole Van Skyke family and Team Karen here in this room, and I know she would be very grateful. Thanks.
Last, I'd like to invite up Deputy DA Maria Wilson.
This is a story of a young couple who displayed extraordinary courage and commitment to one another under extremely traumatic circumstances. It was about 3:30 in the morning. Heidi and Daniel were asleep in their bedroom when they were awoken by a tapping noise at their bedroom window. Danny pulled up the blinds to see what the noise was, and he comes face to face with the defendant in this case. The defendant started making strange comments like, "Where's your money?" He insinuated that somebody else was out there with him when he said, "Jimmy, go get your shotgun." As you can imagine, Danny and Heidi are scared. They don't know what's going on. They don't know who this man is. They don't know what he's about to do. The next thing they know, the defendant is pushing up the window, climbs into their bedroom, and he's holding a huge industrial-sized hammer in his hand. Once he's inside their bedroom, he orders Danny to close the window, and then the defendant himself goes to close both doors to the bedroom, so they're essentially kind of locked in this small space. Danny and Heidi are huddled together on the bed. The defendant is pacing around the bed, holding this huge hammer in his hand. Initially, Danny and Heidi thought he was there to rob them, and in fact, they even told him at one point, "Hey, take whatever you want," hoping he would just take their stuff and leave. Unfortunately, the defendant was not there to steal their stuff. He had much more sinister purposes in mind. He began to forcibly sexually assault Danny and Heidi, and like Bruce, we don't need to go into any of the details. Heidi and Danny were terrified, as you can imagine. Danny knew that he had to do something in order to protect Heidi, or some very bad things were going to happen. And Danny also knew, and this is what makes him such a hero, he knew this was not a fight he was going to win. The defendant in this case was 6'2", 240 pounds, and he's got a weapon in his hand. Danny didn't have his glasses on that morning. He knew that the guy had something in his hand. He thought maybe it was a knife. But defendant's 6'2", 240 pounds. Danny's all of 5'9", 5'10", 140 pounds. Danny's only hope was to hold back the defendant long enough to give Heidi a chance to run. In his mind, he knew that he may not survive this situation, but he also knew that he wouldn't want to live if he didn't try to do something to protect his girlfriend. So Danny told Heidi to run as he attempted to put kind of a body block on the defendant. The defendant quickly overpowered Danny, got him in a chokehold so tight that Danny wasn't sure he was going to make it out of this situation. Heidi, the hero that she is, instead of running and leaving Danny to fend for himself, she uses her bare fist to punch through the bedroom window and starts screaming like her life depended on it. A number of their neighbors heard the screaming and called 911, and in fact, one particular neighbor testified during court, and she described the screaming as something that was so terrifying she hopes she never hears a sound like that the rest of her life. It must have been quite a scream, because the defendant finally let go of Danny and he ran out of the house. Officers from the Sacramento Police Department responded quickly. They set up a perimeter search. The defendant's running. He's on the run. He's running. He's jumping fences. He's hiding in people's backyards. He's doing everything he can to escape detection. Ultimately, Officer Kukovic was the one who physically chased this guy down and tackled him in someone's backyard. And if you can imagine, it's dark out. The officer is chasing him through backyards. He's not familiar with the territory. He doesn't know whether this defendant has a weapon. He has no idea what he's getting into. And if there's anybody here who doubts the bravery and the dedication of law enforcement in Sacramento, look no further than this case. I'd like to also thank and acknowledge Sergeant Pat Colas, who's here today, Detective Mohammed Rafiq, Detective Scott Kreutz, Officers Gomez, Valenzuela, Wiseman, Lopez, crime scene investigators O'Connor and Rostasil. Their hard work led to the successful prosecution in this case. The defendant was convicted and sentenced to 57 years to life. I also want to thank victim advocate Mei-Lin Chung, who provided so much support and encouragement to Danny and Heidi throughout this process. You know, at the time of the crime, Danny and Heidi were just 20 years old. These two young people showed a tremendous amount of courage early that morning fighting this man off, and they showed a tremendous amount of courage in court facing this man yet again. Danny literally put his life on the line to protect his girlfriend, knowing that he was going to lose. And Heidi, instead of running, took action and punched through a glass window with her bare fist and screamed like crazy. Danny, you are living proof that chivalry is not dead. And Heidi, you are feisty. And I couldn't help but think of you when I recently read this quote. Be the kind of woman that when your feet hit the floor each morning, the devil says, oh crap, she's up. Anne Marie, I present to you Danny and Heidi for this year's Outstanding Citizens Award.
First of all, this wasn't really one of those events where, I feel like an award that I wanted to have happen. It's not an event that obviously asked for. It's just one of those nightmare things that you don't think will happen and then you're living it. So I feel like the award is mainly just for the district attorney and all the officers, because sometimes these people get away with stuff like this, and it's maybe one of the few times that someone is caught and goes through and gets justice that they deserve. So I would like to thank all of our neighbors that made the calls, and Marie Wilson and Mei-Lin, who's here, and then all the officers who I don't even know who any of them are, or the detectives I think we met one time, and of course, I guess Heidi as well. But like I said, it wasn't really like where we're in a situation where like, sweet, we're gonna get an award. So I feel like it's, but I mean, I'm glad to be here just so that all the, people involved, I guess for them it feels like a rare success that they could get somebody, justice that they deserve. So thanks.
So at the end of this, I would like all the recipients to come up and we'll take a group photo. There's a phrase I oftentimes use with the folks in this very room or people across this state, and that's called team justice. And there's no question that that name should resonate with all of us, because at the end of it all, that's what we are. We're all part of this team. And I'm just going to go back to the same 3 words, and I'm going to add the word that Bruce said, which is strength, resilience, and courage. And ultimately, that results in justice. And I think when you listen to these stories, what's important for all of us to remember when we leave this room today is that on the streets of Sacramento, every day, we have strength, courage, resilience, and ultimately justice within that courthouse across the street. And there's no question in my mind, and I'm very confident in yours, that these very folks are the superheroes among us. And we should celebrate what they have done and encourage folks that ultimately become victims or witnesses to do the very same. And with that, I thank all of you for coming. I always look forward to this every year. We have some snacks and stuff outside, paid for by the DA's office. And with that, thank you for coming. And all the honorees, I'd ask you to come up and we'll take a group photo. So thank you very much for coming.